Welcome to the podcast summary of History of Indiana. Indiana's story is a lot older, messier, and more surprising than the usual state history shorthand. It starts with deep indigenous history, runs through land seizure, debt-fueled ambition, fights over race and citizenship, and then into war, reform, industry, collapse, and reinvention. A big theme all the way through is that Indiana kept remaking itself, but usually under pressure, and often at someone else's expense. Human history in what's now Indiana goes back at least to 8000 BC, with Paleo-Indian hunting camps and flint mining near Wyandotte Caves by around 2000 BC. Over time, woodland peoples developed pottery, grew squash, and built burial mounds, and Hopewell communities tied the region into long-distance trade networks that reached astonishingly far, even towards Central America. The biggest pre-European population and political complexity came with the Mississippian world, especially from about 1100 to 1450 AD. This is the Indiana of maize farming, copperworking, bows and arrows, ceremonial plazas, palisades, and major earthwork centers like Angel Mounds, which connected the region to the wider Cahokia orbit. And when that world declined, the reasons were practical and environmental, not mystical. Soil depletion, deforestation, climate change, and then political reorganization into the Caborn-Wellborn culture. That matters because it pushes back on the old romantic nonsense that these earthworks must have been built by some lost outsider population. Indiana became strategically important because its rivers linked French Canada and Louisiana, especially through the Wabash and Maumee corridors. French traders and missionaries built posts at places like Vincennes, Fort Miamis, and Fort Ouiatenon, but native nations still made up the primary population and political reality on the ground. Then came the violence of the Beaver Wars and later conflicts, as the Haudenosaunee fought for control of the fur trade and displaced or dominated many native nations across the wider region. French alliances and firearms helped some Algonquian groups resist, including a major Miami-led ambush near present-day South Bend. What followed under the United States was not some gentle drift of settlement. It was military pressure, treaties made after defeat, and removal. The 1795 Treaty of Greenville opened much of southern and eastern Indiana to white settlement, and the Potawatomi Trail of Death, along with the 1846 removal of most Miami people, makes clear that statehood came with systematic dispossession. Early Indiana leaders went all in on internal improvements. Canals, roads, railroads, and public works meant to turn a frontier into a thriving state as fast as possible. Some of it worked. Land values rose, farm output grew, and transportation really did begin to change what was possible. The problem was scale and timing. Too much was built at once, too much money was borrowed, and by 1841 the debt had climbed past $13 million, which was crushing for the time. Indiana barely avoided bankruptcy by liquidating most of the public works and handing them to creditors in exchange for cutting the debt roughly in half. That failure left a mark. The 1851 Constitution imposed stricter financial rules, expanded elections for public offices, and deliberately weakened the governor. It also marked a larger shift in orientation. Rivers and canals had tied Indiana toward the Mississippi and New Orleans, but roads and rail systems increasingly pulled it toward the Great Lakes, the Northeast, and a national market. Indiana entered the Union as a free state, but that didn't settle the question of slavery or racial equality. Not even close. Territorial leaders had tried to suspend the Northwest Ordinance's slavery ban to attract settlers from the Upper South, and the politics around labor and bondage stayed intense. An anti-slavery legislature reversed earlier pro-slavery and indenture measures in 1810. And then the Indiana Supreme Court made two major rulings, Polly Vassell in 1820 and the Mary Clark case in 1821, both establishing that people held in bondage or disguised indenture were legally free. But legal freedom did not mean equal citizenship. Indiana restricted black migration, denied civil rights, criminalized interracial marriage, and the 1851 Constitution even tried to bar black settlement entirely. So Indiana abolitionism existed alongside fierce anti-black sentiment, which is one of those uncomfortable truths that explains a lot more than cleaner state myths do. Article 13 was invalidated in 1866, but exclusion didn't disappear. Sundown towns and similar practices lasted well into the 20th century. Indiana was the first Western state to mobilize for the Civil War, and ultimately sent 208,367 men. More than 24,000 died, and over 50,000 were wounded. Its troops fought in nearly every major engagement, and Governor Oliver Morton kept the Union effort going by borrowing money and, in effect, sidelining the Democratic legislature when it threatened the war effort. The war changed Indiana economically too. Once the Mississippi was blockaded by the Confederacy, Ohio river ports like New Albany lost their old dominance. Railroads and Great Lakes connections became even more important, which helped shift growth toward northern and central Indiana. After the war, industrialization got another enormous push from the discovery of the world's largest known natural gas field in the 1880s. That drew glassmaking and manufacturing to places like Muncie, Gas City, and Hartford City, and later Eli Lilly's pharmaceutical advances, including mass-produced penicillin, helped make Indiana a national center of medicine. After the Civil War, Indiana turned into one of the country's great swing states, with razor-close elections and turnout that sometimes nearly hit 100%, which sounds impossible now, and a little exhausting, frankly. National parties chased Hoosier support aggressively. Benjamin Harrison's 1888 campaign drew more than 300,000 partisans to Indianapolis, and 6 Hoosiers have served as vice president. But reform politics here often came with a controlling streak. Protestant temperance groups built strong, dry coalitions, helped pass statewide prohibition in 1917, and backed ratification of the 18th Amendment. Opposition often came from Catholics, Lutherans, Episcopalians, German Americans, and others who framed the issue as one of personal liberty. Women's activism grew through these same networks of temperance, abolition, suffrage, and civic reform. Indiana women organized newspapers, clubs, housing campaigns, welfare efforts, and suffrage associations, and black women built their own statewide club networks under leaders including Hallie Quinn Brown and Madam C.J. Walker. One of the darkest chapters came in the 1920s, when the Ku Klux Klan became a major force in Indiana politics and drew support from a wide cross-section of Protestant society. Grand Dragon D.C. Stevenson bragged that he was the law in Indiana, and for a while that was disturbingly close to true. His power collapsed after his 1925 conviction for the murder of Madge Oberholzer, and the scandal exposed corruption reaching into the governor's office, the mayor's office, the attorney general, and beyond. Indiana's industrial economy kept expanding through steel, automobiles, rail cars, and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. But the Great Depression hit hard. Statewide unemployment rose above 25%, and coal mining unemployment approached 50% in the early 1930s. New Deal projects put about 74,700 Hoosiers to work in 1935, building and improving roads, bridges, libraries, flood control systems, and public buildings. After World War II, manufacturing prosperity eventually gave way to automation, foreign competition, plant closures, and the broader Rust Belt crisis. Since then, Indiana has diversified into pharmaceuticals, healthcare, services, advanced manufacturing, electric vehicles, batteries, aerospace, and defense, even as personal income rankings slipped sharply from the late 1960s to 2017. So if there's a through line here, it's adaptation with consequences. Indiana kept finding new ways to connect, build, produce, and compete, but every era also left behind people who paid the price or got pushed aside. That history is a lot more useful than the tidy version, and honestly a lot more interesting too. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.